Um, all right, enough fun, you guys. Back to work. Uh, I'm going to have to cut it a little short today because anyway, maybe 11:10 or something like that. So let's get to it. I want to, we haven't really finished on Hobbes yet. I want to review the arguments against his picture of humanity in a state of nature as a war of all against all, very famous statement. And this has been researched kind of in sophisticated ways by a lot of people using game theory and ethology, which is the study of our near relatives. Uh, and Hobbes claims he's an empiricist. He states this, and he's not relying on any kind of, he doesn't want to present himself as relying on any kind of metaphysical principles like Aquinas would or Plato would. He wants to stay away from that and just rely on physical evidence. And yet, I don't think he's presented the physical evidence in a way that's credible. And for starters, it's just a fact that we can observe both animals and humans uh, cooperating spontaneously. And, his argument, just to review a second, is that in a state of nature, in other words, in the absence of government, people are in a war against each other. Each individual is in a war against each other. All acts are selfish, and so they're all directed towards uh, your material advantage, not your spiritual advantage. Now, if you remember, Socrates said all acts are selfish in a different way. He said, yes, of course, everything that you do, you intend to do to make your life better, every action. But he said you can make a mistake about what makes your life better. And one of the mistakes would be to concentrate on your material well-being as opposed to your spiritual or intellectual well-being. That would be a mistake, according to Socrates. But according to Hobbes, the mistake would be imagining that there's anything but a material advantage. So that really, if you think you're increasing your spiritual advantage or your intellectual advantage, you're just deluding yourself. There are only material advantages, according to Hobbes. Well, this is just such a broad statement, and again, I said, and if you got my little note this morning, I said that I don't like to psychologize philosophers, because you could just go on and on about any narrative explaining why somebody believed what they believed. You can be a Freudian, you can be a Marxist, you can be a subscriber to the great man theory, all kinds of different ways. Whereas I just want to direct our attention to the specific argument. However, it certainly can be said that in Hobbes' case, he was terrified by the disintegration of society that he observed in England with the Civil War and the plague. He was horrified by it, and he got it in his mind that in the absence of a strong government, everything would just uh, fall to pieces. And so um, he justified this opinion by saying that everything is material, all critters are out for their material advantage, and so they're always in competition with every other critter. And like I said, there's various ways in which this has been disproven by all sorts of sociology, evolution, several lines of argument argue against this. In other words, there is a great advantage. In game theory, we find that sometimes there's an advantage with cooperation, and sometimes there isn't. There are certain times when you're better off acting as an individual, and other times when you're better off uh, cooperating. So just the blanket statement that every act is selfish, intended to advance your material situation is just not justified by the evidence. And another line of argument, if you remember from last time, that I said is that if he's going to um, say that all acts are selfish, how would he demonstrate the truth of that? And if you remember from the beginning of the class where I distinguished between a priori and a posteriori knowledge, well, a priori knowledge is knowledge we have before any experience. And an example of this would be mathematics. Another term that's very closely related to a priori is analytic. And we're going to get into more of this with Kant and Hume. An analytic statement is true by virtue of the definitions of the words in the statement. So 2 plus 2 equals 4 is an analytic statement. If you understand what each term means and what the verb means, you'll understand that the statement is true. Whereas synthetic, which is similar to a posteriori, synthetic means you have to go outside of the statement, as it were, to bring other, in other words, synthesize other evidence to support what you're saying. Now, I think Hobbes believes that he's saying something that's a posteriori. In other words, he's basing his idea that all acts are selfish on the observation of things. And as I've just kind of briefly summarized, the evidence doesn't really support this. There are plenty of instances where uh, direct um, cooperation is the best solution, the most advantageous to each individual. So, and evolution proves this out. And I mentioned ants and bees, where uh, the group is more important than the individual, and that's how they behave. And it's not because they have a ruler telling them this is how they have to behave. They've determined, or evolution has determined, that that's the best strategy for them. And I argue that with human beings, that's also the case. Um, and we can observe that people will spontaneously group together, sometimes to defend themselves against another group. The Constitution says uh, the first purpose of government is to provide for the common defense. In other words, uh, so that you don't have to defend yourself, you're going to group together, form a government, and provide for the common defense. And this is, we can observe this in gangs. This is no different from what a street gang would say, or a biker gang, that you join together and you got your turf and you protect yourselves and from others. And there's all kinds of social commentary we could do on this, but I just think it's just not true, the bland statement that he makes that everything is individually selfish. That is not a good strategy for survival, which of course he thinks is the main goal, survival. Anyway, getting back to the a priori a posteriori thing, he thinks that he's basing his position on observation. But I would say it's an a priori statement. And another way to put this is it's non-falsifiable. This is a 20th century kind of concept. Uh, Whether a statement can be falsifiable or not, if it can't be falsified, then it doesn't really mean anything. And the statement that all acts are selfish is not falsifiable the way he presents it. In other words, if I look like I'm being kind to somebody, I'm really being selfish. So it doesn't matter what I do or the appearance of what I do, the empirical evidence for what I do, it's in fact selfish. So there's no way to falsify it. And therefore, uh, one way of looking at that is it's really a meaningless statement. And you haven't added anything by saying all statements, excuse me, all actions are selfish. Anyway, this argument that we have to have a strong government to prevent us from killing one another just doesn't go through. It's not supportable by empirical evidence, which is how Hobbes says he's supporting it. Um, all right, now there's another thing, however, that Hobbes is famous for, and we didn't mention this, which is um, that, and I believe Hobbes is the first one in the Western tradition to say something like this, and that is that all of our perceptions that our brain presents to our consciousness are phantasms. That's the word he uses. He was familiar with Greek and Latin. It's a word that comes from the Greek, and it means the same thing in Greek, in ancient Greek, that it means now, which is phantasms are kind of dreams or illusions. Let me read what he says about this. This is a very modern thing, by the way. This is the first statement I know of in the Western tradition of this kind of thing. Here's a quote from not him, but Francis Crick, uh, the DNA guy. He says, "You, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules." And Feynman has said everything that living things do can be understood in terms of the jigglings and wigglings of atoms. And this is really Hobbes' version of this is really the first time we have this appear in the Western intellectual tradition. So we have to kind of give him credit for this. Here's what Hobbes says, word for word. Sense is a phantasm caused by the action of external objects upon the eyes, ears, and other organs. And the phantasms of sense are retained and called memory and varied and compounded into dreams and imaginations. Uh, let's just compare it for a second to the prior people who never considered this really. Uh, Plato thought that any perception that we had was kind of informed by the forms. In other words, if we saw a tree and we understood what it was, it's because we have some kind of memory of what a tree is. That's an oversimplification of Plato. Um, Aquinas thought, like Aristotle, okay, let me just say, Aristotle next thought that our perceptions of things or our understandings of things were the result of our abstracting generalizations from the perceived world. Um, but he thought they were real. Also, Plato thought that our perceptions informed by the forms were real. They knew we could make mistakes, but the idea that our whole consciousness was the product of a bunch of physical activity, even though the Greeks had Democritus, the atomists. We had the atomists, but even the atomists didn't say that our sensations and our consciousness were caused by atomic things. At least they didn't say that. It may have been implied, but that's not what they said. They never actually said that. Um, and Aquinas and Augustine have been, influenced by the Greeks. And the Aquinas is going to say that our sensations are real. They come from the world, and they might be also informed by some laws of God. Augustine says the image comes from perception, but we also have divine truth. And this leads me to my next point, which is a term, nominalism, which I think we've mentioned before. Nominalism came from the view that was a medieval view that whatever human understanding there was of the world was just what we called things, but God knew what they really were. So nominalism just means we made up the name, as it were. That's what nominalism refers to name, and our names may not be God's names. God knows what things actually are, and we just know what the finite consciousness or intelligence of human beings understands. That doesn't mean it's necessarily real. And so what Hobbes is doing is advancing that same notion, except instead of applying it to God or saying that there is a consciousness that does understand everything, which by the way is also what Bishop Berkeley is going to say. To be is to be perceived, and to be perceived in reality is to be perceived by God. Anyway, what Hobbes is going to say is that whatever we see is just a function of physical um, uh, occurrences in the mind, in the brain. So this is actually consistent with, I'm sure, what Laurel thinks or any other neurologist thinks, that whatever's going on in our minds is a result of, and we could justify this by taking drugs. We could take drugs, as we were talking about pot or wine. If we, that's a chemical reaction. Somehow we are varying the function of the mechanical universe, in other words, the chemical and electrical universe that we perceive, we're varying that by changing the chemical uh, status of the brain. So it's very clear that that is the case. Or you can hurt your brain, you can have a disease, or you can get injured, and the brain can cease to function in a normal way. So we know that the perceptions we have are caused by physical reactions inside a physical body. So this is, Hobbes is denying that there's any kind of spiritual uh, substance. And by the way, Aristotle did the same, although he didn't. Aristotle didn't go to the extent that Hobbes does in saying that everything is a phantasm, because Aristotle thought that whatever we perceived was real. He didn't believe, however, there was a non-physical soul that described the body or described our consciousness that survived our death. Aristotle did not believe that. Hobbes doesn't believe that either, but he also believes that whatever we see with our senses or understand with our minds is a result of physical activity and not the result of, say, I don't think Aristotle was very clear on this. Plato kind of had an idea of what he thought was going on. But Hobbes says none of that is going on. It's all just um, a function of chemical and electrochemical. Well, he didn't say that because he didn't know what it was. But basically, mechanical processes is what produces our consciousness. And this is going to be, next guy we're going to talk about is going to be a Descartes. And Descartes' going to make this even more radical. His understanding of what the mind is doing is going to be even more radical than Hobbes. Uh, but anyway, Hobbes extends this to moral judgments of what is right and wrong. And let me see if I can get the quote here. He is a nominalist in also ethical things, not just in reality, but ethical things. Let's see here. Um, Truth and falsity uh, have no, this is a quote from him. Truth and falsity have no place but amongst such living creatures as use speech. Whatsoever is the object of any man's appetite or desire, that is it which he for his part calleth good, and the object of his hate and aversion evil, and of his contempt vile and inconsiderable. Good and evil are merely what we fear or desire. That's all they are. There's no independent existence of good or evil in the universe, according to Hobbes. And So this is again, this is another version of nominalism. It's a nominalism though that's based on a mechanical view of the universe rather than a supernatural view of the understanding of God. So those are significant things that Hobbes said, even if we want to dismiss his reasons for his political or social understanding. We don't we have no reason to dismiss his insights with regard to human consciousness, which I think is substantial. It's a substantial contribution. All right. One more thing that's interesting about Hobbes is Hobbes is one of the many people who's going to support the golden rule. Now, the golden rule in Western tradition comes from Jesus, but most religions have their version of a golden rule. I believe Buddhism, maybe Doug knows better than I do, but I think both Buddhism and Hinduism have, I'd have to go back to the text and look at my notes, but I think they both have versions of the golden rule. It's not limited to Christianity. But the interesting thing for us is that Hobbes supports the golden rule, which you would think is counterintuitive. And not only Hobbes, but also we're going to see Kant supports it from a different perspective, and Mill is going to support it. And the support by Jesus, by Hobbes, by Kant, and by Mill are all based on completely different understandings of the relationships between men and each other and also men and the universe. A completely different. I mean, Hobbes and Jesus both believe we should abide by the golden rule. Well, Hobbes doesn't believe there's any such thing as God, so that's a pretty basic thing. So where does he get the golden rule? He gets it from prudence. In other words, uh, it's your best program, it's your best plan to abide by the golden rule because it will be to your material advantage to treat others in this way. And what you do is you establish reciprocity. And reciprocity is going to be to your advantage, to your advantage in being successful within a society, materially successful. So abiding by the golden rule is not done because it's righteous. It's not done because it's the word of God. It's not done for the benefit of all mankind. It's done because it's to your advantage to abide by it. Doug, you got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the where those quotes came from. Did they all come from the Leviathan?
I think so. One of them might have been from De Corpore. The Hobbes wrote in English mostly, but he had some things he wrote in Latin. Among them were De Corpore. Let me see if I have that right. I mean, I have it right, but let me see which quote was from De Corpore. Just give me a second. Sense is a phantasm caused by the action of external objects upon the. That quote is from De Corpore, and that was written in Latin. But whatsoever, this is from the Leviathan, whatsoever accidents or qualities our senses make us think there be in the world, they are not there, but are seemings and apparitions only. And this is the great deception of sense, which is also by sense to be corrected. And that's from the Leviathan. Uh, so I don't think I read that one for you a minute ago, but so that's a pretty clear statement of that same position that all of our perceptions are caused by physical activities or mechanical things.
And so the the notion that what is it you call it, prudence, that it's a good game plan to approach others in a way and so on, but ultimately that naturally coalesces around cooperative activity, right? I mean, in other words, it just as we say that not everything is selfish, that the nature of social beings cooperating with each other because it's good for each other, which is his point, right? Isn't his point that you should do that, do unto others because, it works. It's an
The
operating theory. I mean,
the
yeah.
the difference is that for Hobbes, it doesn't have any moral pardon me, doesn't have any moral part. There's no moral part to it. There's no moral aspect to it. It's totally a matter of power. So when you do unto others as you would when as you would have them do unto you, you're hoping to gain an advantage. And as a matter of fact, now his view of the state is very hardcore. Whenever you join other people in order to, as I say, provide for the common defense, as it says in the Constitution, you thereby give up your right to self-defense. Your ultimate right is self-defense, and if the state no longer can provide your defense, then the state has no reason to be, according to Hobbes. But insofar as this is true of a street gang. I always like to put it this way. It's true of a street gang as well as the United States. When you join a group, you give up certain rights and you hand them over to the state in exchange for protection. That's what you do. So it's an illusion to think that we all have individual rights. It's a fairy tale we tell ourselves. In fact, the government of the United States has power of life and death over every one of us. And that's not just true of the United States. It's true of any government or any street gang. You give up rights in order to gain the protection of the group. That's what you do. But Hobbes views this as a material exchange. There's nothing moral about it or ethical or nothing that abides by a higher principle of governance or liberty or anything like that. It's totally a matter of hardcore survival, and this is why you do it. It always impresses me when somebody says, they're a member they're a sovereign citizen. I go, what does that mean? Like you are going to defend your own property against the nuclear weapons of Russia? Is that what you mean? Because you don't have any rights that are not granted by the state. You don't have any property. The property you have is because there's a Department of Government that knows where your property lines are. But in the absence of that Department of Government, you don't have any property that you can't defend with a shotgun and a rifle. So we've all given up our rights in exchange for our protection from the nuclear weapons of China and Russia. Peter, you got your hand up.
Yes, several points. Well, three at least, separate ones. Confucius also has a version of the golden rule, and like Jesus' version, it's negative. Don't do to other people what you don't want them to do to you. I think the problem with the golden rule as a purely prudential or pragmatic thing is that it works up to a certain point, but it doesn't work at the point where cutting your partner's throat or your neighbor's throat is actually to your material advantage, which does sometimes happen. So I don't think you can rely on it. I think that was sort of what Neil was getting at. You can't rely on it if it has no ethical dimension. The second point is I agree that as a sweeping statement about the state of nature or what humans are naturally like, the atomistic selfishness that Hobbes postulates isn't well based empirically. But we can get into a situation where that is exactly how people are behaving. He thought that happened during the English Civil Wars. Looking back with the knowledge of modern history, the English Civil Wars seem unusually courteous almost.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
But, the philosophy of atomistic individualism, which late capitalism, especially in the United States since Ronald Reagan, has tended to favor, is, it's basically a war against all, and you ought to win, and that's the right thing for you to do. So, it isn't that this is nature itself. It's that Hobbes has quite a lot to say about the sort of situation where people actually are opposed to each other, which I think, as you're suggesting, usually involves a degeneration from something. That is, it was tolerable before, but now, something has arisen that makes it intolerable for people to behave decently to each other. And the third thing is a much more general point that I don't think you really want to pursue now. I'm familiar with the idea that if it can't be verified or falsified, it's meaningless. I got that from Alfred Jules Ayer's Language, Truth, and Logic. I'm not sure that, I don't think he originated it. Maybe the Vienna positivists or somebody else did. But it seems to me not only wrong, but incoherent. If I say something about a unicorn, it can't be verified because you could always say, well, there are unicorns somewhere or other. It may be a silly statement, it may be untrue, but it's not meaningless. That is, a meaning is conveyed when I say, but there are unicorns. And, that's a pretty absurd example, but there are many examples that are less absurd. And it seems to me that A.J. Ayer and the logical positivists reach a point where if they were being consistent, it would be impossible to make any ethical statement. It would be impossible to believe that the imagination can create anything. It would be impossible to value art and literature. And honestly, I don't think Ayer and the logical positivists do. I think all the way through life, we are making judgments and saying things that can't, in the scientific way, be verified or falsified. It's true if there's positive evidence or negative evidence and we're ignoring it, that shows something bad about the way we're thinking. But I think Ayer and the logical positivists seem to have this idea that only a scientific way of testing a hypothesis really counts.
Okay.
I think
Can't you say, I'm just sure, I'm unclear, Peter.
stop there.
Given that the universe is infinite, can't you almost say that any stupid thing anybody says or does to somewhere in this universe is true?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's a smart thing to say,
Yeah.
well, there are unicorns somewhere. I'm saying it means something. That is, we know what is meant by the false statement, or as far as we know, the false statement that there are unicorns somewhere. That's the distinction I'm making. I'm not denying, I'm not saying you can say, well, somewhere in the universe, 2 + 2 might not equal 4 or something like that. I'm only saying that to say a statement isn't true or is true is not the same as saying the statement is meaningless or meaningful.
Okay. Can I, Peter, you've said 3 or 4 semesters worth of stuff there, and we can't unravel it all. But let me just respond specifically to something in the 20th century. It's called sense and reference. I think it was a distinction that was made probably by Kant in the beginning, but also Bertrand Russell. The idea is there's a sense that your unicorn. We can't disprove that there's a unicorn flying around Mars right now. And you're saying, well, okay, it means something. And so, in some sense, it exists. And so, the the idea that something means something, and this is, by the way, how Kant attacks the ontological proof of Anselm. Existence is not a predicate. So a predicate will describe a bunch of stuff. And then what you say is, and it exists. So there's two different things. You say, this makes sense. This makes perfect sense. But then you can ask whether it exists or not. And so the unicorn thing, we can say, well, it makes sense. There's no evidence that it exists. And then the second thing is non-falsifiability is not the same thing as verifiability. Non-falsifiability just means that if you can't produce any circumstance under which this this fact could be disproven, then it doesn't mean anything. Now, I can imagine a test about a unicorn flying around Mars. I can imagine a test for that. Like perhaps I have inhabited Mars and set up a radar system or all kinds of sensors, infrared and radar and visual and so forth, and I can view the anything that was in the reasonable orbit of Mars, and I can see that nothing is there, or anything that is there is something I can identify. Then I can say within relative sanity that no, there's not a unicorn flying around Mars, and so it is conceivably falsifiable. Whereas what Hobbes is saying is not conceivably falsifiable. Any kind of human action, the way he puts it, is selfish. So if no matter, I brought up the example of Father Damien last time. If Father Damien is selfish, then there just doesn't, that word just has lost all meaning. There's no way to falsify that somebody's being selfish. If he's being selfish, well, my God, what are we all doing? So the idea of non-falsifiability is that you can't conceive of a test that would prove this wrong. It doesn't mean that you can prove it right. It means you can't conceive of a test that can prove it wrong. It's slightly different. And this also, you're right, this gets us into all the 20th century stuff. Wittgenstein wrote the Tractatus with the idea that the Tractatus, you can think of it as like there's what they called atomic facts. In other words, a fact that can be identified by, say, a chemical formula. We know this is this exact thing. And maybe you identify it also by time and place. And that is an atomic fact. This molecule of water existed here in this space and time. Of course, now with quantum mechanics, it's not so easy. But anyway, uh, you have a bunch of atomic facts like that, and then they're connected by logical statement, what they call well-formed statements. This is all 20th century stuff. Well-formed statements. In other words, a proposition that follows all the rules of logic and grammar, and you can connect two of these atomic facts. And if you can't do that, then what you're saying is meaningless. This is kind of what Wittgenstein said, except that he himself limited it. And he said, this is all the things we can say are things that we can identify the actual, like, what does this noun specifically refer to? And is it connected to the verb in a way that follows all the rules of logic? And if we can't construct something like that to say something, then we should just shut up about it. Now, the fact is that all of us rule 99% of our lives based on facts that cannot be verified in that way. That's how we live. But Wittgenstein wasn't really, I think it's not accurate to say that he thought you could do that. He's just saying that if you want to call something true, it has to abide by these rules. Now, the later Wittgenstein abandoned that because for the reason that language isn't that logical. That's one way of using language, but I can also say, I don't know if I gave you the example. I just heard this example the other day. If you say, I know a guy, uh, you're thinking about a guy who could fix your lawnmower. But if you say, I know a man, you're expecting a story to come out of it. So the subtle difference between the word man and guy in those two constructions, which are identical otherwise, leads the listener to come up with different appreciations of what you've just said, different expectation of what's to follow. And so Wittgenstein points out that that's how subtle language is, and it can't be diagrammed in the way that he thought it could be in the Tractatus. And nevertheless, that doesn't mean it's invalid, that it can't be. So that's kind of what you were saying, Peter, that you can't expect. And by the way, this all goes back to Socrates. Socrates just says, he says that there's one thing he knows, and that is there's a difference between truth and opinion, and it's worth knowing the difference. Now, most of our lives are led, I would say, on the basis of things that can't be verified empirically, scientifically. You know, this is one of the disputes I had with Ayn Rand because she said you should never do anything that isn't rational. Well, the desire to do something that's rational isn't rational. It's just something you desire. That itself isn't rational. I want the world to be rational. Okay, I want to live in a rational world, so I'm going to act rationally. Well, where does that come from? A desire. A desire is not rational. So she is very confused, that woman. But anyway, back all the things you said were very well said, Peter. It's just that it gets us into a whole nightmare of, not nightmare, but a web of 20th century stuff that is all legitimate. But what I have to do is kind of approach this step by step and just lead us to where we are now. And all these guys are important and have said things that are still with us, as it were.
Yeah. All the relevance to Hobbes, I think, is instead of saying the statement that every human action is really selfish is meaningless, you would say there's quite a lot of evidence that that statement is not true, though it has a meaning.
Well, yeah, we all know what that means. I mean, we all know that people act selfishly and maybe overwhelmingly so. I don't know, but that's a different kind of thing than what he's saying. He's saying every action is selfish, and that I don't think can be verified. And again, just on the basis of the things I mentioned before, which are sociological, ethological, evolutionary, game theory. All this stuff has been, Hobbes has been run through all these different sieves and diced and handled by graduate students, no doubt, for a few hundred years. Uh, and there are just many lines of evidence that throw doubt on what he has to say. That said, sometimes you have to break all Hobbesian on somebody, as I said earlier with the sovereign citizen argument. There's no such thing as a sovereign citizen. You've got as much property as the government says you have, and if they say you don't have it, then you don't have it. That's the way it works. And Hobbes, I think it's wise to understand that you've made a trade. In our case, you've made it by birth, but some people make it by immigration. You've made a trade. You're exchanging your allegiance to yourself to an allegiance with the country in exchange for your protection and survival, and so forth. Meredith, you had your hand up.
Oh, I was just going to say those I have run into in my life who claim to be sovereign citizens have been duped by the idea that if they're sovereigns, they don't have to pay income tax.
I know. It's an absurdity. They don't understand what human civilization is. Um, I must say I'm very fond of Hobbes' hardcore idea of what the government is and what you're doing, and you're dealing with the government. I'm very fond of that. Don't kid yourself. The government doesn't exist because of a bunch of abstract rules. It exists by power, and it has the power, and it holds the hammer, and you've given it the hammer, or you and your fellow citizens have given it that power. And you're getting something in return. It's not like it's a one-sided deal. Well, I guess it can get that way. It can get that way, but you get something from it. I don't have to fight the Chinese with my nuclear weapons. Any more stuff on Mr. Hobbes? Okay, so just to take away from that, we don't think that his main theory, just as far as remember, he claims to be an empiricist, and he claims that. And what I'm saying is empirically, we can't justify his conclusion that the only way out of there's no way out of our situation as human beings, which is in many ways imperfect and there's no return to Eden or anything like that. There's no redemption by Jesus. There's no meditation. Nothing is going to solve the problem of human existence. The best we can do is protect ourselves from other people that want to kill us by having a monarch. That's basically his argument. And I'm saying that the argument doesn't stand, but even if you make that deal, he hasn't proven that a monarch is best. And I think the founders were smarter about this than he was. Because the problem is you have a monarch, okay, great, you have a monarch, but then what is the son of the monarch going to do? I mean, if the monarch gets to just hand this off to his son or daughter, are they going to be wise leaders, even if the monarch is a wise leader? The founders realized that that was the problem. There, right there was the problem. You could have a benign king or monarch, wise, benign, everything like that. You could have one, it could exist. But how do you guarantee the next guy how do you guarantee the transfer of power? And that's where the genius of the founding fathers was, I think, and the Constitution. Anything else? Oh, I'm sorry. And the other point about Hobbes is the idea of the mechanical basis of consciousness, which we still haven't sorted out. We don't have a neurologist among us. Philby majored in neurology, I think, or he can't major in neurology, but I think that was uh, a specialty of his. Yeah, Doug.
Did Hobbes think that the monarch, this issue of succession, was handled by the fact that, or the idea that the king was divinely put in place?
You know,
And
that's a good question. I don't think he discussed the transfer of power to the son or daughter. I don't think he discussed that. I'm not aware of it. I don't remember it anyway. Peter?
I think his position is even if it's a bad absolute monarch, you're probably safer with a bad absolute monarch than without any government.
Yeah.
I
That
think on that point, the founding fathers were much more right than Hobbes was.
yeah, they were street smart compared to Hobbes. And the what Hobbes, I think, had in his mind is you have an alternative. Either you have an absolute monarch or you have chaos. It seems to me it's a false dichotomy, but I think that's the way he looked at it. Anything but a monarchy was going to produce chaos. Anything else? All righty, very good. The next guy we're going to discuss is Rene Descartes. And we can make, okay, Descartes is known mainly for three things. One is he invented analytic geometry. And in other words, the X and Y axis, that grid, that was something that was thought up by Descartes. There's several of these guys. The three that I think of that always come to mind are Descartes, Kant, and Darwin, who would be famous even if their famous theories had never been produced, because Descartes came up with analytic geometry. I mean, that's pretty intense. That's pretty important. And had he done nothing else, he would be famous. But we don't even know him for that. It's not even something we remember. And Kant came up with the theory of the formation of the solar system out of a disk of gas. That's Kant's theory, not uh, not well known, but that's we still have that theory today. And Darwin was the guy who described how coral atolls develop. And considering the technological tools at the hands of Darwin and Kant, those are two pretty amazing discoveries or theories that turned out to be correct, considering they had so little to work with. Anyway, so that's one of the things he's famous for. We're not going to be talking about analytic geometry, though, uh, but it's it's not insignificant. But we're just not going to talk about it. The other two things he's famous for are what's called radical doubt. If you see the phrase radical doubt, it's almost always going to be referring to Descartes. And that's what resulted in the cogito ergo sum, which is the I think therefore I am, which we'll be talking about. And the other thing he's famous for is dualism. I would say of the dualists in history, of the history of philosophy, the two most famous are Descartes and Plato. But they weren't the same kind of dualists. They had a different kind of dualism. Now there is ethical dualism, like I always mention George Lucas, the force and the dark side, or the heaven and hell, and Zoroastrianism, and uh, the Manichaeanism, which we all of which we briefly discussed. Those are ethical dualisms, but metaphysical dualism is mainly Plato and Descartes. And Plato, of course, had the world of forms and the world of perception. So there were things that you could understand, like math, just using your mind without seeing any evidence of it. You don't have to see evidence that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And there were things that you had to know, you had to learn, like the name of your friend, you had to learn from the world of perception. These two different worlds are what make up our mental understanding or our understanding of the universe. Descartes' dualism was mind and body. And this, okay, I think I'll talk about that maybe next time. This is very interesting for right now for artificial intelligence. The distinction between mind and body is once again on the forefront when we come to artificial intelligence and people saying that artificial intelligence is conscious. So what does that mean? We want to ask ourselves, what does that mean? Because uh, the mind body problem is this: you seem to have an idea that doesn't have any physical substance to it. Like I have an idea that I want to wave my hand right now. There it goes. How did that happen? What was the connection between my seemingly disembodied idea and my very embodied hand? How are those two things connected? Why did that happen? I can't explain it. I actually can't explain it. I mean, I'm sure you could put me under an fMRI, a machine, and if you had me wave my hand, there would be a little part of the brain that would light up that controls my hand. Uh, and we know that's the case. But it still seems very mysterious that that thing that you see in the brain is not what I experience. The thing I see with the fMRI machine, where there's a little more blood flow to, I don't know where it is in the brain, a little more blood flow. Yeah, okay, you saw there was a little more blood flow. What's the connection between that blood flow and the idea I have in my mind, which seems to have no physical substance? And Descartes the distinction he makes is between what he called Latin words are res cogitans, which is the thinking thing, and res extensa, which is something extended in space. And we're going to talk about that more later, but that's one of the things Descartes' famous for is the mind-body problem, which is still with us today. And like I say, there's a resurgence of it. The other thing he's famous for is radical doubt, and I think we might be able to dismiss that a little more quickly. What Descartes says is, "Hey, has anybody seen The Matrix? I did not see The Matrix, but you can you can help me if I misrepresent it, but the idea in the Matrix is there's a computer that controls somebody's brain consciousness. Am I correct? Something like that. Well, this is just straight out of Descartes' Meditations, where Descartes imagines, he says, how do I know that what I'm perceiving right now isn't controlled by some, he calls it an evil genius? How do I know that my brain is not controlled by some other entity and that I have no say in the matter? I'm just somebody that's having these experiences. And he goes, when I'm dreaming, I seem to be perceiving a real world. I'm completely convinced that there's a dinosaur chasing me. It doesn't seem like I'm having a dream. Now, sometimes you can have a lucid dream where you kind of know you're dreaming. That's very bizarre. But most of the time, when you're in the middle of a dream, you're totally in the middle of the dream. So Descartes raises the question, how do you know you're not in the middle of a dream right now? How would you verify that? And he doesn't think you can verify it. He says, I can't prove that I'm not, well, he will eventually, but at first, this is radical doubt. I can't prove that I'm not dreaming right now. How would I prove it? I could point to something and say, see, that's real, but that's just something I'm imagining, just like I'm imagining all you guys in this computer screen. It's just something I'm dreaming. How do I know that's not something that's controlled by an evil genius on the planet Zotar? I don't know. How do I know that? And how can I prove it? And just like the guy in the Matrix, I assume that this is consistent with the setup in the Matrix, except it's a computer instead of an evil genius. Am I correct? Okay, so and then what Descartes arrives at is, well, I can't prove anything. I can't prove anything that I perceive right now is real. I can't prove it's not an hallucination. However, I am having an experience. And so the one thing I know for absolute certainty, and that's what he wants. He wants to reach a point of absolute certainty so that he can build his philosophy up from there. He's going to start with a blank slate. He's not blank slate. I shouldn't have used that. That's locked. But he wants to start from ground zero. He wants to get back to an absolute, clear, and distinct point of truth. And then he can build his philosophy up from there. He's going to throw everything he's learned from the philosophy he was taught and everything he's learned in school, everything he's read, everything he experienced. He's going to throw all of that out. And he just wants to start from a place of absolute certainty. What can I not doubt? And the thing he can't doubt is he says, I think, therefore I am. In other words, I'm having an experience. I can't doubt that. I can doubt that the experience is real, but I can't doubt that that is occurring, that I'm having an experience. How can I doubt that? In the very act of doubting it, I'm activating it, or I'm experiencing the doubt. So I'm experiencing something. Now our question to Descartes is, or our question for Descartes is, what do we think is wrong with Descartes' conclusion? Do you think you can doubt even the conclusion that Descartes comes to? Okay, Peter's nodding his head. So how can you doubt that, Peter?
I don't remember where I read this, but somebody said you can't conclude I am or I think. All you can really say is thinking is going on.
That's right. That's
That gets you somewhere, but it doesn't get you as far as Descartes wants to get you.
nowhere near it. Not only that, but the very word I indicates a singular thing. How do I know that whatever I'm referring to when I say I is the same thing that I was referring to when I started this sentence? How do I know those two things haven't changed throughout time? I mean, a radical example would be multiple personality disorder, where I really do think I'm different people at different times. But even within normal consciousness, the guy at the beginning of that sentence may not be the same guy at the end of the sentence. How can I be certain that's true? So that's another level of doubt that Descartes didn't address himself to. The other thing is the conclusion, which is I think, therefore I am. Well, therefore, what is? The thing that's thinking is, but what is that thing? We can't and he's going to extrapolate on this and we're going to land on him for that. I think I'll reserve that for next week because uh, uh I have to rush off to the doctor myself today um and so I'm gonna have to take leave of all you good people. But anybody have any response to Descartes? Before, I mean, he's easy to ridicule, but don't write him off so quickly, Doug.
Just the mind body thing. How does that? I'm just wondering about transgender issues. You know, what makes you what you are? Is it your mind or your body? You know,
Well, that's a good one. I hadn't applied it to that question to that particular problem, but it's a very good example of a conundrum that and like I said, I was kind of making an extreme example, but are you the same person you were 20 years ago? You're going to say I did this when you were 20 years old or so? Was that the same guy that you are now? That's a very weird thing by itself. So who is the I referred to? As this is what Peter brought up. What exactly does that I refer to? This is going to be examined also by Hume and Kant. Uh, and the 20th century guys too. Let's see. Doug refers to the ship of Theseus, which, as you probably know, is an idea that if you completely change all the parts in the ship of Theseus, is it the same ship? This is um, this is actually going on right now. There's a guy named um, Leo who has completely rebuilt a ship that he bought for $1 about 10 years ago. That's was built, I think, in 1920. And just about everything has been replaced. And so somebody raised the ship of Theseus to him. Do you still have the same ship? Have you completely, is it a new ship or is it the same ship?
but your cells all get replaced too. However,
Everything, all the
yeah.
wood, everything, almost nothing is still there. So is it the same ship or not? So that's the ship of Theseus thing that Doug just referred to. Do you have another one, Doug? I do have to run, but let's see if you got anything else here on the chat. Um, I should watch The Matrix, he says.
Yeah.
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 Oh, and I should, I suppose. I'm there's a million things that I haven't seen, but I'm not I'm not sure that. Well, it'd be interesting to see it, you know. But anyway, I always like to say that in my case, I'm pretty sure that whoever's controlling my mind is not an evil genius. I think we can rule out the genius part off the top of our heads, and the evil. I don't like to think of myself as all that evil. Uh,
Well, let's hope that the you who gets to the doctor is the same you who starts out.
there you go. Thank you, Anne. And
Both of you,
also,
good luck with your doctor visits.
yeah, well, thanks very much, and good luck to Anne and everybody else that's recovering from something. And we didn't see Barry today, but so we'll see all you guys next week on Tuesday, and we'll explore Descartes a bit more. That's what will be on the menu.
Thanks, Tony.
All right,
Bye,
everybody.
everybody.
Bye bye.